And we are back on the 0 Hour. I, of course, am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. Quick, if I asked you to name the one kind of business that you wanted to make sure was rescued by Congress in the face of the coronavirus threat, would you say lobbying and lobbyists? If your answer to that was yes, then you're not human, because I don't think any living human organism actually believes that it is incumbent upon Congress or the American people to rescue the lobbyists for corporations as opposed to public interest lobbyists, the lobbyists for corporations who distort and influence public policy on behalf of said corporations as opposed to speaking up for the interests of the people. So this is a long-winded way of getting around to the topic my next guest is going to discuss. Adam Eichen is a democracy policy expert. He is also, among other things, and perhaps most importantly for today, co-founder of the Democratic Policy Center, a group that pursues, as you might assume, policies to support democracy. He's also the co-author of the book Daring Democracy, Igniting Power, Meaning, and Connection for the America We Want. And he joins us now to talk about some new polling on this subject. So first of all, Adam Eichen, thanks for coming back on the program.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. This is a critical topic that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, so I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, yeah, it's a very important topic. And just to be clear, I suggested that people who support bailing out corporate lobbyists aren't human. Of course, that's not true. There are such people, chief among them are corporate lobbyists. But before we get to the polling on this subject, could you please just give us a little background why you do this polling in the first place?
Sure. So it may be surprising to your listeners, or maybe not, if we've all become pretty cynical about how Washington works. There's been a lot of momentum during this coronavirus crisis in Congress to bail out what are called 501c6 organizations. They're trade associations. And a lot of people are saying, well, local chambers of commerce need funding because they're struggling. So local chambers of commerce are one type of 501c6 organization, but also groups like pharma and AHIP, the top insurance or the top lobbying groups for the healthcare providers and the drug companies. They are also part of the 501c6 network of organizations. And so there's a movement in Congress to try and extend the PPP loans, so essentially free forgivable loans that were meant for small businesses, but allowing these 501c6 trade associations, or what we would call lobbying groups, to access those loans, again, free money. And, as we've seen in the news quite a bit, the money is running out, and not all these small businesses who wanted to get it are necessarily able to access it. So this idea of allowing these lobbying organizations to, get a piece of that federal money in response to this massive historical economic crisis and pandemic is frankly baffling. And so there was originally an effort, there's a standalone bill, H.R. 6697, which would limit the 501c6 organizations that would qualify to 300 or fewer employees. But here's the rub of it. 99.8% of trade associations have 300 or fewer employees. And in the HEROES Act, the Democratic Omnibus Bill, the crisis bill that passed recently, it would actually make it even worse, that essentially any nonprofit would qualify, any 501c6 would qualify. But if you have 500 or fewer employees, you would qualify for a select nonprofit fund that would be created for reserve a certain amount of the remaining PPP funds for those nonprofits. And so essentially, you're by allowing these trade associations, these lobbying groups, access to PPP funds. Not only are we bailing these organizations that fight every day against progressive policies to be bailed out by the federal government, but we're also putting them up against small businesses and other groups that really do need the money.
And I want a couple points I want to make before we get into your polling, Adam Eichen. Number one, that when we talk about nonprofit advocacy groups, I just want to make our audience crystal clear. I think that they're all with us at this point, but just to be clear, these are groups that may be structured as nonprofits, but they are representing, by and large, very much profit-oriented industries, including pharma, whose profits, I would argue, kill Americans every day, or people in this country every day. They are, but all sorts of other profit-making groups as well. So when they get described as nonprofit advocacy groups, for example, it sounds almost benign, but we're really talking about the people who influence government policy on behalf of profit-seeking corporations, by and large, right?
No, that's exactly right. And I think what you see is that there's an organization, it's a lobbying group for lobbying groups. It's called the American Society of Association Executives. And they keep framing this as, these are groups that spend very little of their money on direct lobbying, and that may be true. But at the core of these organizations they're trade associations. They are groups that try and push the policies that benefit their industry. And so you're right, it's the healthcare providers, it's chemical companies, it's fossil fuel industry. I mean, they're funneling money to these C6s, and then in a variety of ways. It's not just lobbying, right? But it's a PR, it's holding conferences, it's doing all these things to advance the industry perspective in DC and in state houses across the country. And so these are influence peddling organizations. I mean, you can hide behind this idea that they're nonprofits or that they're just local chambers of commerce, but really actually there are a lot of these 501c6 organizations that would qualify under the existing pieces of legislation in Congress right now that don't deserve a bailout. I mean, these are the largest coalition of industries that, again, I mean, this is the key point for your listeners. They're the ones who are blocking change. They're the ones who are fighting against Medicare for all. They're the ones who are fighting against the Green New Deal. These trade associations, these large corporate trade associations, are not your friends. And under one of the proposals, including in the HEROES Act in the House, the Chamber of Commerce could qualify for PPP funds. That should tell you everything right now. The Chamber of Commerce is arguably the most powerful trade association, and on every single issue, they are always on the wrong side of progressive reform. And so why the Democrats in Congress would even consider bailing out the Chamber of Commerce is beyond me.
Well, and I just want to make one other point. Maybe I haven't seen this anywhere, and if in fact it's been written about, I don't know it, and maybe I'll write about it. But I know in my own corporate days, I had 1,000 people working for me, and if someone from the American Insurance Association or another one of these groups, Health Insurance Association of America, said, "Richard, we'd love a study on blah blah blah," I might put 12 people on it, and you multiply that by all the different companies. Even an organization with, let's say, 30 employees, a trade association of this kind, actually in real terms may have millions upon millions of dollars of resources, like the former me, that it can draw on at any time. So these are not like scrappy little, what was that Jimmy Stewart movie, the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. These are highly resourced and leveraged institutions, even if they're small and nominally nonprofit. At least that's my take on them.
Right. No, I mean, the financial records, we compiled a big database where we calculated how many, of these trade associations, these lobbying groups could qualify under the employee threshold. And again, you look at their most recent financial reports and they have millions upon millions of dollars. I mean, the idea that pharma is pleading poverty here is laughable, right? I mean, these are very well-funded trade associations that really have endless money. Because the ones who are providing the funds are the ones who, skimp off the top of the American people, when they're doing drug pricing and things like that. And so these are not, I mean, look, if you want to have an argument about whether or not local chambers of commerce should be bailed out, let's have that argument. And that's why, they're with all this bad news, the senators from Rhode Island, Whitehouse and Reed, they have issued a letter saying that we should allow 501c6 organizations into the PPP loan program, but we should cap it at 50 employees. That's a much more reasonable proposal than what's been floating around right now. I mean, again, the standalone bill that's gaining bipartisan momentum, I mean, it has over 100 co-sponsors right now. That's HR 6697. Again, that caps it at 300 or fewer. 99.8% of 501c6 organizations would meet that and could qualify. And again, these are organizations that in a variety of ways influence policy in a non-progressive way or an anti-progressive way. It's
and as a corollary to this, Adam, I did want to point out that some Democratic members of Congress wanted to include labor unions, 501c5 organizations, I believe. And, the word was no, you can't do that. Can't help labor unions make ends meet, but we can help lobbying group, which to me makes it even more objectionable. So you guys have been working on this. You guys have been monitoring. And by the way, I'd love to see the data. Maybe before I let you go, maybe we'll let everybody know where that could be found. But so you guys did polling on this, and tell us what the polling found.
Well, the polling is pretty clear that Americans don't support bailing out lobbying groups. And what you found is we tried to test the message, right, of would you support Congress bailing out local chambers of commerce if it also meant bailing out large corporate lobbying groups? And the answer was no. By double-digit margin, Americans don't want that. They don't support that. They oppose that. But the far more interesting result, right, beyond the sense of we kind of predicted that Americans would not be super in favor of giving money to these lobbying groups that represent the fossil fuel industry, the healthcare lobby, drug manufacturers. We actually asked a multi-set of questions about do you think it's important to bail out X, right? And so we asked, in terms of what that X means, right? We asked, do you think it's important for Congress to provide coronavirus relief funds to small businesses? Overwhelmingly, the answer was yes. This is the key point. Do you support? Do you think it's important for Congress to bail out individuals and families? That was the number one choice. That I believe it was something like around 90% of people said that they think it's somewhat or very important to bail out families and individuals. I think it was 89% thought that, right? Overwhelmingly popular, things, especially for things like, some of the recent proposals giving direct contributions to families and individuals, like I think Bernie Sanders proposed $2,000 a month. That lends support to that idea. But when we come to lobbying groups, only 30% of people thought it was somewhat or very important. The vast majority, 70% of people, thought it was not so important or not important at all, right? So in terms of priorities, there was widespread consensus that Congress should not be using this opportunity, given this historical crisis, to provide funding, coronavirus relief funding, to these lobbying organizations. And it's interesting, right? Because the lobbying group for lobbying groups, the American Society of Association Executives, they this week, as we're speaking, held a advocacy week for this bill, for a variety of bills, but specifically they were trying to push Congress to pass this some sort of extension of the PPP funds to include 501c6 organizations. And one of the keynote speakers was Virginia Senator Tim Kaine, and they asked Tim Kaine, "What are the odds that this gets passed?" And Senator Kaine said around 60 to 70%. And the reason, he said, was priorities. And he said, will the Senate essentially think will this meet the big stack of priorities that we have to deal with to respond to this crisis? And he mentioned, the upcoming wave of potential evictions, or the, hunger crisis that could come as food pantries run out of food. Now, it was kind of baffling to even hear this considered, given that, clearly two of those priorities are significantly more urgent and right, moral to address than lobbying groups. But again, in this kind of, it wasn't secret, but it was in this association keynote, the fact that there was even a talk of weighing these two priorities together was really baffling, given that one of them clearly is more urgent than the other.
Well, Adam, uh, as a friend, I would say, but we both know it's not baffling.
Of course.
Right? Because, I mean,
Of
from a
course.
logical point of view, it's baffling. But given, as you well know and have written about and researched so much, given the way our particular electoral system runs on money, it's the most logical thing in the world. First of all, that he would give that keynote, which otherwise I would think would be politically unattractive to do. And secondly, that you would link them together specifically because one is popular and one is not. At least that would be my interpretation.
Right, and it's actually really funny because in that conversation, one of the moderators asked, well, associations can, it's really easy to mischaracterize them as lobbying organizations, and so we kind of were like, I guess we got under their skin a bit,
Right.
And it was so weird because Tim Kaine was basically running interference for them. He gave a long answer about, ways that they could characterize themselves to not be labeled as lobbying organizations, kind of an information, ears to the ground kind of organization that consolidates the expertise and the information provided by specific sectors. And again, like there are associations that do that, and maybe there's a time and a place for that. But again, when we're talking about bailing out pharma and AHIP, and get this, one of the trade associations that could qualify is Stand Together, which is the Koch network's 501c6 organization.
Well, to be fair, the Kochs don't have very much money and they need the help. But
true.
And I guess I can't go away without asking you this question, Adam Eichen, which is, your survey, I looked at it. It was, very genteelly phrased in terms of, what voters would and wouldn't prioritize. It did not ask, for example, what idea horrifies you or you would absolutely not want your elected representatives to do. And I understand why it was structured the way it was, but it leads me to my question, which is, even if we don't have data from the survey, I can't help but thinking this is terrible politics for anybody, Democratic or Republican, but especially Democrats, to vote for a measure that will be seen not inaccurately as bailing out corporate lobbyists. I mean, I would think that's not a smart political move unless you just feel you need the contributions more than you need the votes. I don't know. Well, what's your takeaway on that?
Well, I agree. And I think that's why, Senator Kaine was saying it's 60 to 70%. But I also think part of the reason why it's 60, 70% chance of passage is because there's a real opportunity to expose this. And if you expose it, Americans aren't going to support it. And what the Association for the Lobbying Groups essentially has said is that the next coronavirus relief package is their last shot, probably, to get this through. Again, there is a standalone bill and it's gaining momentum. I think it's going to be hard for them to try and build real public momentum on a standalone bill to try and get this passed. Now, they might, and maybe, there's a lot of support in the Senate, too. About 22 senators have 24 now, if you include Whitehouse and Reid. But again, with the caveat that those two support the 50% or 50 employee threshold, there's momentum in the Senate. So there is a chance for a standalone bill to get through both houses because there's bipartisan agreement here. But I think the best shot, at least from their perspective, and optically, is if they get it into another omnibus package where, like in the HEROES Act, it's tucked away on page, I don't remember what it was, 800 something, right? So we knew exactly where to look, but if you're not looking for it, good luck finding it, right? And so this is why it's so important that we're keeping track of this, because if we're not doing it, no one else has thus far. And, I think as your listeners can extrapolate, giving large sums of money to, the enemies of progressive change is not just bad optically. It's also really bad strategy to creating a more just world.
And not good for democracy either. So
very bad for democracy.
And Adam Eichen, the name is spelled E-I-C-H-N, E-I-C-H-E-N for those of you who are listening on radio rather than watching on TV. And Democratic Policy Center. He is the co-founder. Where can people go to get more information?
You can go to our website, dempolicy, that's DEM policy.com. That's our homepage. You can contact us there. You can also follow us on Twitter, same account. That's where we break quite a bit of news on multiple different fronts, and we'll have a lot more coming in the upcoming days.
Well, I hope you'll come back and talk to us about that as well. Adam Eichen, again, co-founder of the Democratic Policy Center. Thanks for your great work, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it as always.
And we will be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.